Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video. Another one. Too much content, I know. This is the Geopolitics news video that I would otherwise have recorded earlier, but I did a live stream with Greg Terry to give you the frontline update and just what's going on from his point of view as he's in Khmelnytsky in Ukraine. Go and check that out if you want to see all that. We have, by the way, raised over 200,000 now for Medivac armoured vehicles that are going to be delivered to Ukraine, and we managed to raise that in that live stream where we weren't trying to do any fundraising and managed to fundraise $6,000 randomly. It's just insanely cool, and that means that we're over 200k and we're moving to the fourth armoured snatch vehicle that will be sent down to Robotina, but the first three have been paid for now, and so it's just going to wait for them to get sorted out. Drone jammers put on, winches put on both ends. It's all completely sorted out and then delivered to Ukraine. So fantastic stuff. Anyway, before we get to the geopolitical news, there's news just out. So this is kind of fresh hot off the presses. Preliminary reports coming out from occupied Crimea. A Russian Su-34-35 has been shot down. Now, as you see it falling from the sky, this is closer imagery showing that plane being taken out. It is now pretty much being confirmed to be friendly fire, I think, of the Russian Su-35. Indeed, I think it is best reported by Special Kherson Cat that has some details on this. So as we come down, we'll find that just here. Here it is. Right, so the first one. It's reported that an aircraft was shot down over Sevastopol, Crimea. By the looks of it, this is a military fighter aircraft. Looks like the pilot managed to eject. A parachute was spotted in the sky. So when you shoot when you lose an airframe, it's almost more valuable that a pilot is taken out with the airframe because of the the Russians particularly have a larger pool of airframes they can dip into, but the pool of pilots is more challenging given how long it takes to train pilots and then to give them experience so that they become a decent fighter pilot. If you lose them, that hurts more than losing the airframe. So it looks like the pilot survived here. More detailed video of the aircraft falling, but actually about 10 minutes before the footage was recorded, there were reports of air raid sirens in Sevastopol, and this leads one to believe it was probably a bit of friendly fire here. The downed aircraft was identified as Russian Su-35, as claimed by Russian sources. It was a friendly fire incident, so they'll rue that. I would imagine the Russians. Now, moving on to geopolitical news, start with Poland. Russia's ambassador to Poland, Sergei Andreev, has left the country. Quote, Ambassador Andreev himself testified to his culture and professionalism. As far as I heard, he has already left our territory, Polish Foreign Minister Sikorski has said, quoted by Gazeta Poland. The publication writes that on a technical note, the Russian embassy said that Andreev left the country for the period from March the 24th to April the 4th. Well, what this was about is actually the Russian cruise missile that went into Polish territory for 39 seconds led to the ambassador being summoned by Sikorski, the foreign minister, to come and explain himself or to explain Russia, and he didn't turn up. He didn't turn up after being summoned, and it turns out he's done a runner or some such situation. Now, Poland is in the news quite a bit because a Ukrainian delegation has arrived in Warsaw or Warsaw to do some discussion concerning finding solutions about the border issues and also that meet the interests of both countries and contribute to economic sustainability, and infrastructure development. So there are a number of things they're going to be talking about, but it's, I think, mainly going to be about finding solutions to the border issues with the hauliers and the farmers. Apparently, the latest is they are ready to conclude agreement on joint border control. Poland and Ukraine agreed to search for mutually satisfactory solutions to issues related to agricultural trade, following Polish-Ukrainian consultations in Warsaw today. Now, That doesn't mean that they found no solutions. They have agreed to search for solutions. So, more talks to be done. Warsaw and Kiev agreed to find solutions, such as a verification and control system for trade in agricultural goods. Ukrainian and Polish ministers of trade and agriculture will continue working on this task. So they've got together formally. Is there a decision on the horizon? Well, how far away is that horizon? Polish Secret Service is quite big news today, I gather. ABW, in cooperation with the Czechia Secret Service, BIS or UZSI likely, intervened against Russian influence network that tried to destabilize international position of Poland and discredit Ukraine. So basically there's been a massive disinformation project from Russia that has been found out by the Polish and Czechia intelligence services. The head of the National Assembly of France, Yael Braun-Pivet, announced her arrival in Ukraine together with the French delegation. So there's a delegation over in Ukraine at the moment. And as I keep saying, this is super important because I think France are really turning up at the moment. The rhetoric is being ramped up in line with how they perceive the importance of the war in Ukraine and the importance that Ukraine prevails. Russia are enemy number one at the moment in France, and they are doing things tangibly to back up their rhetoric. So it's really good to see that there's a delegation out in Kyiv at the moment from France. Now, talking about disinformation campaigns, fake government websites are being shared on social networks by malicious accounts as part of disinformation campaigns. This is, according to the Ministère des Armées. Let's translate this because you won't want my French translation going on there. Talking about disinformation, the URL of the site Get Involved in Ukraine, which uses a graphic charter of government sites, is currently circulating on Twitter. This site is a fake government site relayed on social networks by malicious accounts for a disinformation campaign. This is a huge problem. Twitter is one of the worst places online, as reported by the EU, for disinformation. Russia are involved in these disinformation campaigns all over the world. Here we've got France, previously, as you heard, Poland and Czechia. But of course, things like Serbia and the Balkans in general, and then the wider US information space, or information spaces, UK, France, Russia are just so adept these days at causing havoc in the information space, and sometimes it involves useful idiots. I've talked to you about David Sachs, about how he's Elon Musk's best mate, and Elon Musk routinely amplifies and retweets and reposts David Sachs's claims about Ukraine, and his claims about Ukraine are demonstrably incorrect. He is part of the disinformation campaign by Russia, whether he knows it or not. And here he's saying, I've been a fan of the Geopolitics podcast, Duran. So the Duran are Russian propagandists. Number one geopolitics podcast in the world, says the Duran. They are number one probably because they're being propped up by thousands of fake accounts, Russian troll farms. But it is a Russian propaganda podcast that now David Sachs is going to be speaking on. Does that surprise you at all? No. The guy spouts Russian disinformation and then goes on a Russian disinformation podcast. But then that information that ecosphere that he is in, or ecosystem, information sphere that he is in, David Sachs, which involves the Duran here, which is basically Russian propaganda, is the same ecosystem that Elon Musk operates in, and he owns this platform and uses his position as a megaphone to amplify the message of people like David Sachs and by extension the Duran. This is a big problem, right? Disinformation is being spread, but it's being spread by people that should freaking know better and that own the platforms of amplification. Euromaidan Press here, reporting that for the first time since 2017, Ukraine's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Dmytro Kuleba, visits India. So he's there today. The purpose of the visit is to implement the agreements of Ukraine and India, including preparations for the first Global Peace Summit in Switzerland. Of course, India being part of BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, South Africa, or China, South Africa. This is a group of countries that are super important in terms of support for Russia or not, right? So although BRICS has this loose affiliation or strong affiliation in trying to present an alternative to the US-led hegemony, to try and get a currency that's an alternative to the dollar in terms of international trade. It might be a pipe dream, but they're certainly working hard at it. Well, you've got Emmanuel Macron going across to Brazil to try and disabuse De Silva of his, I guess, De Silva's a funny one. Like, I don't think he's particularly pro-Russia, actually, but he's also a bit anti-US hegemony, and so his, like, Brazil's position has been quite interesting. But anyway, Macron's over there doing his thing to try and get Brazil on side, and Kuleba here is over in India trying to get Modi on side. So even though BRICS has China, India, and Russia in it, these are all quite uncomfortable bedfellows. And actually, India doesn't get on too well with China, and they have disputes over like border areas and whatnot. And India doesn't really get on well with Russia, and actually China doesn't historically get on like a house on fire with Russia. It's a marriage of convenience, and India will extort effectively cheap hydrocarbons from Russia if they can get them, but it'll be on India's terms. They're not going to do favors for Russia just because they're members of BRICS. And in fact, the US is turning the screws on places like UAE and China and India in terms of their banks, who are processing payments from or for Russia, and they are now stopping doing that. And we'll come to this. So, you know, as I say, marriage of convenience. They aren't necessarily like big allies, India and Brazil, of Russia. Now, Reuters is reporting that Russia turns to Belarusian gasoline, petrol, amid decreasing domestic supplies. In fact, we'll go back to that. Just go to give a little more meat on the bone. Russia is increasing imports of gasoline from Belarus to avert possible shortages connected to recent Ukrainian attacks on Russian oil refineries. So this is evidence that the Ukrainian oil strikes on Russian oil refineries are having an effect, a tangible effect on the Russian ability to produce refined petrochemicals and to therefore either use them domestically or export them, and this will hit them in the pocket. Ukraine's attacks on Russia's oil terminals, says Tim White, continue to have an effect. New figures, he says, haven't been able to verify, suggest that Russia is having to import fuel urgently from Belarus. In January, they took 0 tons. In February, 590 tons. In March, 3,000 tons. That's not huge amounts, but that shows a direction of travel there, doesn't it? Ukraine's drone attack, says Euromaidan Press, can cause a fuel deficit in Russia and disrupt the war machine if they persist. Despite Russia's vast oil production, its ability to produce fuel shouldn't be overestimated. The number of major oil refineries is limited to 32, and at least 10 of them, perhaps 12, have already been targeted by drones. Explosions have partially or fully disrupted their work. This is a continued issue for Russia, although Ukraine has not done that for a couple of days. They did hit 2 refineries, and then a couple of days before that there were no strikes. We can wonder whether Ukraine have a deep enough stockpile of drones to do this kind of activity. Probably not. They're probably firing them as they make them. Maybe they're stockpiling them for a huge attack. There was talk about the US being angry that Ukraine had done this. This was denied by the Ukrainians. I reported this as it was reported in the Financial Times, and then other sources have come along and said this. You've got apparently Matthew Miller in the US Biden administration saying, you know, not happy with strikes inside or they don't support strikes inside Russia. But then there's this counter argument that this is exactly what the US is going to say. They're not going to say we support that, because then it invites a retaliation and an escalation from Russia. But it's actually it could be that under the radar, the US are like, yeah, go for it, mate. I have no problem with you striking Russian oil refineries, but we just can't say that publicly. So all these different ideas floating around, but nonetheless, I mean, this Euromaidan press article is a bit large for me to go through at the moment, but there is an effect on Russian petrochemical output as a result of the Ukrainian strikes, and this will hit them where it hurts, in the pocket. It will restrict their ability to make money to fund the war, but also to get things like gasoline to the occupied territories, both for their domestic population, but also for the war effort, for their own vehicles in the war to have fuel. Putin is considering raising taxes, and of course all of this will be connected, including the possibility of implementing a progressive tax as Russia faces financial strain due to the war in Ukraine. The cost of the so-called military operation, estimated at $300 million daily, coupled with rearmament efforts and Western sanctions, is draining the Kremlin's treasury. So the National Sovereign Fund, Wealth Fund, has been pillaged by Russia themselves in order to pay for the war. I think 50% of their fund has gone, or I can't remember the exact amount, and that will include gold reserves as well. So while Putin highlights last year's economic growth, it largely stems from military spending. So this is the kind of false signal that is sent out by getting onto a war footing. So if you get onto war footing, your GDP goes up, and then Putin can say, look, our economy's growing because we're producing an absolute ton of tanks, or we're refurbishing tanks and infantry fighting vehicles and making these shells, artillery shells. So look at what we're producing as a nation. Our GDP, our gross domestic product, what we're producing has gone up. Look at us. We are bucking the trend here. We are fighting against the odds, and Russia's economy is booming. And you're like, what are you producing? Tanks. To go where? To Ukraine. To do what? To get blown up. What about the rest of your economy? How's that going? How are you doing? How's the leisure industry going? Oh, you've just had a terrorist attack on that, and then, interestingly, and as terrible as that was, people are giving back their getting refunds on, apparently, public events. So public events are taking a massive hit, as you would expect, actually. But that's just another element of how Russia's going to be is struggling as an economy outside of the defense domain. Outside of that sector, how's it looking? How are hydrocarbons going? Oh, you're struggling to sell them to the West because of sanctions. So you're selling them to the East, but they're screwing you over, like India and China. They'll take them, of course they will, but they'll take them at a price that's good for them and not for Russia. So Russia is selling stuff, but hydrocarbons, but at less than they would like to. They've taken a massive hit in their income streams from hydrocarbons, but also the rest of the economy is going to be really struggling outside of that defense sector. Russian trade with Turkey is coming to a halt. Turkish firms can't receive payments and are closing their export bank accounts. The Turkish Ministry of Trade called the situation force majeure, as banks are stopping transactions en masse due to fear of sanctions. This is the US flexing their muscles, and this is brilliant because the US are struggling in terms of getting meaningful military aid to Ukraine because of the impasse in Congress and one person, Mike Johnson, with the puppeteers of Marjorie Taylor Greene and other MAGA lawmakers, but then Trump behind, and then you could say, and Putin behind Trump. So there is that, but given the impasse in Congress, the US, as I keep saying, I think is stepping up in so many other ways that might go under the radar somewhat. It's their application of sanctions. It's the turning of screws in international in the halls of international trade centers, where the US are saying, look, if you're going to do deals with the Russians over here, then we're going to sanction you in the US. And do you know what? That's pretty bloody important to you, because this is how much trade you do through the US and with the US dollar, and this is how much trade you do with Russia. And so by all means, go and do some trade with Russia. But if you do that, you're going to lose all this. And so Turkey is now playing ball with the US, but also it appears India, as I mentioned, India, UAE, China, these banks are starting not to do business with Russia, and India, for example, buying a lot less hydrocarbons as a result of the pressure of sanctions on them. Secondary sanctions. Now, Gabon has become, because we all know that Gabon, an African nation, is the absolute epicenter of international aviation industry and aviation trade. It's become the largest supplier of spare parts for Russian airplanes. Almost $2 billion worth of aircraft parts were imported into Russia from abroad in 2023, and most of them, almost 1.5 billion, so 3/4, were allegedly shipped from Gabon. According to Russia customs data seen by the Moscow Times, that's the exiled Russian media outlet, the Russian companies for which the parts were imported from Africa have the hallmarks of dummy firms. In other words, just like we've seen in Kyrgyzstan and Armenia and Tajikistan or wherever, all of these nations around Russia that are seeing a huge uptick in imports and then exports into Russia are being used as countries to do this trade with Russia. We see Gabon is allowing the Russian airline industry, the aviation industry, to tenuously hold on to its position. According to in addition, 15 used engines for Boeing 737s and Airbus A320s and A321s worth more than $58 million were imported from Gabon. The first aircraft parts from Gabon went to Russia in August 2023. I wonder if, for example, the US and the EU will get on to pressuring Gabon, as we've seen them do with these other nations we've just been talking about. So German prosecutors are charging Europe's industrial giant Siemens, their staff, over Crimean turbine deal. So 5 employees accused of bypassing sanctions, so think Gabon like we just heard, to sell gas turbines to Russia, the Russian-occupied Crimea. They've been accused of that. 4 Germans and 1 Swiss person facilitated $119 million worth of sales, knowing turbines would end up in Crimea. So it's this idea what you knew where they were going to go eventually, and you still sold them, therefore you are liable for breaking sanctions. Rather than these situations where maybe smaller components might end up going to this entity, then that entity, then that entity, then abroad, and then to that entity, and then end up in Kyrgyzstan and going across the border to Russia. Does the person back here know that that's going to happen? Well, these are kind of microchips in washing machines or whatever. That's much more difficult. But if you're selling huge, I mean, the size of these things, I saw one of them. I wonder if it's got it here, a picture. These are massive, right? These are big old bits of metal turbine. I don't know that it's rendering at the moment. Bit of an issue with the old internet. But anyway, these are big old bits of kit that don't go from here to there to there to there to there. Basically, you sell these. These are big enough to go, you're right, it's going to go from here to there and from there to there. Okay, and if you're selling that in Siemens and you know who's going to be buying this turbine, right? These turbines don't fit everywhere. It's not a washing machine. This can only fit in certain massive, like, power plants or whatever it is. You know where it's going to end up, and it's going to end up in Crimea, and you know that's sanctioned, so therefore, rightfully, these people have been done over. Right. US and UK are reviewing more than $20 billion of cryptocurrency transactions that pass through a Russian-based virtual exchange as part of allied efforts to crack down on sanctions evasions that are supporting Putin's war in Ukraine. So again, we're on these topics of sanctions and sanction evasion as being a way for Russia to continue doing business to fund the war. And it's great to see that there is this focus on the way that Russia can make money. And here we've got cryptocurrencies, and the US and UK are looking into that. Now, Russian propagandists, I occasionally dip into their despicable nonsense. Here, Anton Gerashchenko says, or referring to probably Russian Media Monitor, but actually it doesn't look like it. Anyway, subtitles by Anton Gerashchenko. Russian propagandists want to, quote, restore historical justice by capturing Finland, Poland, the Baltic states, and Alaska. Serbia will join voluntarily, though, they believe. Again, it's videos like this that should be showed to the American public so that they understand that when they are saying things against Zelensky and against Ukraine in an attempt to stop funding going to Ukraine, which only benefits Russia. What are Russia saying? What are the people, the propagandists in Russia sanctioned by the Kremlin saying? So in other words, what is the Kremlin saying? Well, we want to restore Alaska and we will go on to the Baltic states, Finland and Poland to restore historical justice. And when you've got Medvedev, the prime minister, saying the Russian Empire has no borders, or Russia has no borders. There are no borders. Whether that be Alaska, whether it be Europe, it doesn't really matter. Okay, what do you feel about that, Marjorie Taylor Greene? I would love to sit Marjorie Taylor Greene down and show her what these propagandists have said in terms of burning and drowning Ukrainian children, about outright killing millions of Ukrainians in genocide, about talking about Alaska being next, about moving on into Europe, about what they really intend to do, what their objectives really are. I'd love to sit her down and say, what's your opinion now? And if it's still not helping out Ukraine, you are just a monster. Right. As Darth Putin here, the parody account says, and by the way, so what's this about? So Putin has been saying in a number of places that Russia isn't going to attack Europe. He's also said that Russia didn't plan to attack Ukraine, but was forced to. He's not stopped in Ukraine. He will be, if he's not stopped in Ukraine, he'll be forced to attack Europe, says Gerashchenko as well. He'll find a reason. So Putin has said he's explicitly come out and said he's not going to attack NATO and he's not going to attack Europe. Okay, but just as Darth Putin here says as a reminder, Moldova, okay, but not Georgia. What happened in Georgia? Okay, but not Ukraine. What happened in Ukraine? Okay, just Crimea. Yeah, well, what happened then? Okay, Crimea and part of Donetsk. Okay, just Crimea and all of Donetsk. Okay, just Crimea and all of Donetsk and Kherson and Luhansk and Zaporizhia. Yeah, okay, all of Ukraine. But not NATO. No, not NATO, of course not. Not. We won't go further into Europe, of course not. Let's look at your form and all of the other claims you've said when you won't attack places. Oh, you've lied every single freaking time. So your word is worth nothing. Don't cry wolf. Mate, you are the shepherd and I'm sorry, we don't believe you anymore. That wolf has come to town, it's come to your fields, and next it's coming to town. We don't believe a word you say, dude. I believe Darth Putin far more than I believe you. Right. Moving on, Kiev Independent reports that the US and South Korea have announced jointly coordinated sanctions on March 27th against 6 individuals and 2 entities involved in financing North Korea's weapons of mass destruction program. And of course, there are obvious links to Ukraine here by point of fact that North Korea appears to be very freely exporting arms to Russia to use in Ukraine. 2 of the individuals named are North Korean nationals based in, wait for it, Russia, of course. Okay. And just to, it's just trying to join the dots here. This is Pekka Kaluniemi saying, now this is funny, a Belgian far-right politician, Philip de Winter, who worked on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party, just like I predicted, has been, so a Flemish far-right politician who worked on behalf of China, has worked on behalf of China and investigation finds. Now, ironically, he threatened to sue me and get my account deleted, says Pekka Kaluniemi, for defamation over the Vatnik soup. So he does these Vatnik soup threads that I often share with you on various people. I did the one on David Sachs recently, and he's already come up today. So Pekka Kaluniemi called out this Flemish far-right politician. Anyway, he's found to be connected to China. And the reason I'm saying this is because this is happening more and more at the moment. We've had several people involved in UK politics who are aides, I think, involved with the Conservative Party in the UK, having links to China and being found out. More and more, we are seeing either politicians or entities involved that can be linked back to China in the same way that we have found links to Russia. And this, we need to be so on it at the moment, you know, in all our countries, whether it be Europe, whether it be Asia, Oceania, or America, South and North America. We are involved in a big 4D game of chess at the moment, where the main players are the US, Russia, China, and you can say that those two are playing together, and the EU, and you can say we play together to some degree with the US, but again, the EU's seeing it's having to fight on its own at the moment and become more independent from the US because US has failed to come to Ukraine's aid in military equipment. But as I mentioned, there's all sorts of other things going on. Anyway, you've got those four main players. UK kind of hanging on to the US a little bit and maybe the EU over here, but say, hey, we're strong enough to stand on our own because we've done Brexit, so we can stand on our own. But actually, let's get together with AUKUS, the US, America, US and Australia as well. And you've got Canada, you've got Five Eyes, US, Canada, UK, Australia, and New Zealand, who all swap intelligence in an organization called Five Eyes. So you have all these players and these affiliations with these players, but it's a 4D game of chess. And in each of our nations, you will have the constant threat of your good old-fashioned spies or people who are compromised, who are doing work for our enemies or opponents in this game. And we just need to be careful of that. We need to be careful about the information space, about the undermining of our what we think are our facts and our perceptions of how the world works, given what Russia is consistently trying to do. But China is going to be doing that as well. Anyway, here's another iteration of that. And I just wanted to play you a bit from this video. This is just from MSNBC, but it can be anyone. But this is to do with US aid, actually, and the aid package for Ukraine and Mike Johnson. But of course,
Kevin McCarthy was facing an ouster, and that deal fell apart. Do we think Johnson would accept it? Would he be willing to take Democrats' help to keep his job in order to get that funding to Ukraine and others?
So the context here is Mike Johnson is being threatened to be ousted by Marjorie Taylor Greene, and so he then may be given support by Democrats in order to get the Ukraine aid through the House of Representatives. But in order to do that, it might be a different aid bill, because there is a theory that he's going to try and take out Israel and Taiwan and just do it as a single Ukraine aid bill, rather than what's passed already from the Senate, 70 to 29. But it includes, as I say, Israel funding and Taiwan. But some of the Democrats might not like that because they don't want to help fund Netanyahu's Israeli war effort, and Netanyahu is becoming more and more toxic as each week goes on. So that's fully justified, I would say, and therein lies a problem. So if you want to get Ukraine aid, it might have to be a separate Ukraine bill, which means it might have to then go back through the Senate to be ratified. Anyway, in order to do that, Mike Johnson is going to have to possibly work with Democrats. Who knew? But Democrats might say to him, look, we will support you in not getting ousted, and we will vote for you to stay in, to continue doing bipartisan work. But it then means that Mike Johnson might be like tainted goods for the MAGA crowd, which is interesting because Mike Johnson has been traditionally called by the left MAGA Mike Johnson. He is part of the MAGA crowd, but in a position of speaker, he realises he has to frickin' do bipartisan work here. You can't, especially with a majority of one going forward, you can't get stuff passed unless you work with the other side, right? This is what governing is about. But of course, the MAGA component want him to do MAGA stuff and only MAGA stuff. And if he does anything, like even if you talk to the Democrats, you're ousted. So MAGA Mike Johnson has now become tainted goods to the rest of the MAGA crowd. So if he does pass the Ukraine bill, how does it look going forward?
Yeah, Jonathan, that's the big question here. Would Johnson rather not be Speaker or be a Speaker that was, in a way, protected by Democrats? That's the big question here. But look, if this motion to vacate does come to fruition, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene filed it on Friday, said that she could force a vote on it at any time in the near future. If she does go ahead with that, a number of Democrats that I've spoken to over the past several days are prepared to step in and protect Johnson. And that would happen if he moves forward with Ukraine aid. Of course, assistance for Kyiv has stalled on Capitol Hill for months now. The president put out his supplemental request around September, August of last year. That has not moved in the House because Johnson is facing a number of conservative Republicans who are apprehensive to send more assistance to Kyiv. So now what we're seeing some Democrats say is, Speaker Johnson, if you move on this aid, or if you putting a Ukraine aid package on the floor is the reason why you face an ouster, we will come in and protect you. And look, that may not look like Democrats voting for Speaker Johnson on the House floor, but there are some procedural things that could go down. A motion to table, the motion to vacate would likely come to the floor. Democrats could vote to table that, and if enough do it and it has a majority of the chamber, that would essentially be quashed, and the House could move on with legislative business. But of course, the main question here is, would Johnson put that Ukraine aid on the table, and does he want to be a speaker that was, in essence, protected by Democrats? A lot of key questions we'll be watching as Congresswoman Greene continues to dangle this motion to vacate.
And they go on to talk about that. It's very interesting. But I think that yeah, I'd be interested to see what you guys think. Republicans and Democrats alike. I'm not trying to be partisan here. You know how I feel about this. But I also understand that Mike Johnson, despite what he wants to do, will also be compromised by the future of his own job and his position in his own party and his position within the different elements of his party. Like it used to be that the Democrats, like, trying to get the Democrats to do stuff was like herding cats, because they had your disparate elements of maybe your Justice Democrats who were much more progressive and left wing, and then your traditional Democrats who are much more centrist and corporate. I know in America, like, Republicans attack the Democrats for being communist and left wing, but in international politics, the Democrats would sit, for me, pretty much in the center, right? Republicans sit to the right, Democrats sit in the center, and your progressive Democrats sit on the left. You Bernie Sanders and your Justice AOC and your Rashida Tlaibs and so on and so forth. So Alyona Presley as well, they will sit on the left. But most Democrats are actually pretty centrist. But anyway, like, what do you think, particularly as Republicans, Johnson will do? What should he do? What are the ramifications for working with the Democrats, and how do you think this will play out, and how long do you think it will be before we actually see a military aid coming to Ukraine from the US? Will it seriously be November before this gets resolved, or can we hope that there will be Ukraine aid before then? Anyway, it's a long time for me to speak about geopolitics, given that I've just come straight off the back of a live stream, and on my two previous videos, I need a cup of tea, I need breakfast, and it's 4:15. So thanks so much for indulging me. Take care, speak soon, but in the meantime, please like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already, and all that kind of YouTubey stuff. Toodle pips.